Welcome to the KISS BCP webinar series, where we discuss all things that relate to no building scenarios, to no people scenarios, no third-party supplier scenarios, and lastly, no systems, all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield. For years now, Kingsbridge has been stressing on how to make your BCP effective by keeping it simple and straightforward. While this webinar doesn't tell you how to keep it simple, it will outline some of the common pitfalls that we've seen all too often. While these pitfalls may not be catastrophic, they certainly slow down the process and make your planning much less efficient. As we are into year 2 of COVID-19, now more than ever, it is critical to put some focus on your BCP and to be able to get it completed quickly and efficiently. This webinar is called BCP Mistakes You Really Want to Avoid for a reason, because Kingsbridge has been building BCPs since 1983, and we have seen a lot of different plans. Unfortunately, a lot of these plans started out with the best of intentions, yet all met the same fate of not being completed due to various factors. This webinar is intended to help you avoid those mistakes that delay your BCP's completion. Today's webinar is being presented by Tam Williams. She has been instrumental in Kingsbridge's BCP building for years and can speak with firsthand knowledge on the success of these fundamentals. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items to take care of. As mentioned in the emails, we've included a few polls in this webinar. They aren't designed to trip you up. They're simply to share goals with each other to better understand each other. We would appreciate it if you'd answer them. We also understand if you don't want to. All attendees are muted, so if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function, second button from the right along the bottom of your window. If questions don't get answered during the webinar and we have time left, we'll try to get them answered at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time, we will answer them via email post-webinar. If you have an in-depth question, simply email us and we can answer it there or via Zoom at a later time. And now, on with the webinar.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. As the title indicates and Skip reflected, we're going to look at some common mistakes that can often be made in business continuity. Some of these may be familiar to you, some may not. And as Skip alluded to, the content for today's webinar is coming from the pitfalls that we actually see our clients fall into when it comes to their business continuity plan and program. And I'll be sharing some of those real life examples with you today. But first, let me just take a minute to tell you a little bit about us here at Kingsbridge and where we're coming from. We're a software and services company. We've been operating in the BCP space since 1983. Our feature product is our Shield software as a solution that can help you develop and maintain your business continuity plan. With that tool, we also offer a suite of communication tools to help you stay in touch with your organization, as well as a mobile app that syncs with our SaaS tool so that you always have a current copy of your plan, even if there's no internet or cell service available. We provide a range of professional services, including BCP mentoring hours that we include with a subscription to our Shield SaaS tool. We also do plan development, tabletop exercising, plan maintenance, gap analyses, and plan audits. And it's through all these professional services that we've seen a lot of mistakes in our time. So it puts us in a unique position to be able to gather and share those with you so that we can try to prevent history from repeating itself. So what are we going to cover today? Well, the agenda is very simple. I'm just going to give you 10 mistakes that we see companies make when it comes to business continuity planning. The goal here is to have you rethinking at least a couple of the routine things you might be doing in your BCP program that perhaps could be done a little better. We'll cover all aspects of business continuity, from the structure of your plan itself to how you go about using it. So, with that in mind, let's get started with our first item: managing the wrong risks. Well, you can't go too far these days without seeing something dire on the news, whether it's the COVID-19 pandemic, the latest cyber threat, floods, or wildfires. We get bombarded by this information every day, and we tend to believe that these are the most critical threats to our business. And this isn't just something we at Kingsbridge have noticed over the years. This is actually based in brain science. Some of you may have heard of the term cognitive bias, the irrational errors that we humans make in our decision making. And there's a specific type of cognitive bias that applies to this tendency for us to think that the latest threat in the news is the one we need to be planning for. It's called the availability heuristic, and it's the basic tendency for people to heavily weigh their judgments towards more recent information. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, polls were indicating that cyber attacks and cybersecurity were the biggest issues facing organizations. Now it's COVID-19 with pandemic plans that have largely been shelved since SARS being dusted off and put back into action. Our Caribbean clients tend to be hyper focused on hurricanes, our West Coast clients on earthquakes, the Midwest on tornadoes. Well, it's important, of course, to prepare for the threats that tend to occur more frequently in your geographic area. We need to think about everything that might impact your business: basic power outages, server failures, transit interruptions. We need to do your best to keep the news far from our mind as possible and really try to evaluate each threat independently. While there is much focus on pandemics recently, at the same time, there have also been cyber attacks, power outages, and floods that have had huge impacts on businesses, yet they tend to get dwarfed by the issue of the day. So I suggest looking at your threat risk assessment and looking at the news. If they're highly correlated, you may need to do some revisiting. The next mistake is using BCP jargon. Business units and management don't want to hear about BIAs, RTOs, RPOs, etc. For those of you new to business continuity, maybe just my listing those acronyms has already tuned you out as you try to make out what each of them stand for. BIA, for example, is that a business improvement area, the Brain Injury Association, or maybe the Brick Industry Association, or maybe the Board of Immigration Appeals. The possibilities are endless. It just depends on the lens you're using to process that acronym. Meanwhile, everything else I say is going in one ear and out the other as you struggle to figure out what the acronym means. The same thing's going to happen to those that you are working with to develop your business continuity plan. They don't want to hear your business continuity lingo. They want to hear that you're working together to figure out what you're going to do if something bad happens to the business. You're going to establish what the priorities will be to get the business back up and running and figure out ways to get those priorities restored and find the resources that might be required to make that happen. Nothing tunes out an audience more than using jargon they don't understand. So really try to eliminate it from your interactions whenever possible. The third mistake we're going to talk about is not using the results of your business impact analysis, or BIA. Now, there is much debate about the utility of a formal business impact analysis, and I'm not going to get into that debate today. The mistake I want to point out here is really twofold. Either organizations do the work to gather the data needed for a formal business impact analysis, and then they don't actually do the analysis part and they don't use the results in their planning, or they don't make any effort to set priorities at all. So let me first address the issue of not setting priorities at all. It can be like pulling teeth to get organizations to document their priorities, along with the resources and dependencies required to achieve those priorities. The assumption is that everyone knows what the priorities are. We see disaster recovery plans developed for IT recovery based on those unvalidated assumptions. Systems, software, and connections to services are designed to be recovered in the order supported by those assumptions. Inevitably, the first time an exercise requires recovery of the data center, all kinds of issues arise with the departments when they hear the actual recovery times they're looking at for some of what they see as their most critical systems, software, and services. Assuming that everyone within an organization has the same priorities and therefore will all work toward those common goals can in itself be a disaster waiting to happen. With every department viewing the organization through their own lens, it will not take long before priorities conflict and people are working in cross purposes. Whether it's through a formal business impact analysis process or just sitting down with management and informally setting out some priorities, recovery will go more smoothly when everyone knows what the priorities are and what may be subject to change depending on the circumstances of the business interruption. Similarly, once priorities are established, if there's no sense of what resources are required to support those priorities, recovery will still be a challenge. A properly executed business impact analysis or similar process will provide you with that necessary list of resources, allowing you to plan accordingly and also look at how realistic your recovery plan is. Sometimes organizations neglect to validate those resource requirements. We often have to circle back quite a few times, particularly with IT and management during priority setting, when the reality of the cost of the resources required to achieve the recovery times that management would like to see are actually itemized. We completed a business impact analysis with a client a couple of years ago after they decided their plan had become too large and complex and was in need of being both updated and pared down. As we were about to go into the validation process to verify some of the resource requirements that came out of the business impact analysis, like how much physical space was actually required if they were to lose their main building, our contacts in the company decided that since the disaster recovery plan for IT predicted it would have all IT systems up and running within 48 hours, and that everyone in the organization was supposed to have a laptop and be able to work from home, at least according to the BCP coordinator we were working with, the expectation was that all business processes should be up and running in this 1,000 person organization within 48 hours, 2 business days. They chose to ignore the results of the business impact analysis that clearly document a number of really specific needs. A few of the many things that were overlooked in this grand declaration were that there is a huge physical mailing portion to this business. Hundreds of letters that need to be printed every day, which at the time were legally required to be physical letters, not electronic alternatives. There's a call center that does not typically work from home. There's incoming physical mail. There were fax lines, all of which did not yet have a solution for working remotely. While the BCP coordinator thought everyone was supposed to be able to work from home, in fact, our interviews indicated that this was largely not the case at all. When COVID hit, this organization suspended work on updating their BCP, then they've been struggling to find a new groove with their now distributed workforce. How about not partnering with IT? Relationships with ID departments can be great and they can be challenging. We've had IT departments so pleased that we've come to write a business continuity plan for an organization because they have a disaster recovery plan in place for their IT resources, but they're not sure that it actually meets the business's needs because priorities and resource requirements have never been established. Or they have doubts that once systems are up and running, the business units are really prepared to operate with limited physical equipment, limited people, or a different physical environment. We, of course, have also had the opposite, not getting the warm and fuzzies from our IT contacts because they're concerned that we're there to tell them what to do, that we're going to insist they change things, and that we might just throw them under the bus or poke holes in their disaster recovery approach. Regardless of the attitude toward business continuity by the IT counterparts in your organization, you need each other. We do our best to develop a great relationship with these folks because they make our lives easier, and we can do the same for them once everyone recognizes the opportunities that the relationship brings. You need to have a good sense of the recovery capabilities of your organization's IT systems in order to ensure your plan is even viable. If your recovery timelines depend on systems being available within a certain time frame, you better be sure that a data center failure isn't going to hijack your plan. IT can help you validate that your plans are doable from a technology perspective and help identify what additional technology might be needed to fill the gaps. In fact, a lot of IT departments are quite aware of the gaps and they would like nothing more to fill them, but they lack the budget and manpower to make it happen. I've seen these gaps between where disaster recovery is at and where the business continuity manager would like to see grow into an adversarial position. The business wants something more quickly, and they complain to management that IT is not able to deliver, often implying that it's IT's lack of willingness or cooperation that is the limiting factor. A better approach is to actually delve into the real world why behind these gaps. Are they receiving direction from management to invest in other priorities? Are they short staffed? Are there physical or technical barriers that make what appears to be a simple implementation on the surface actually a very expensive and labor intensive undertaking? Once you have that understanding, you and IT can together present to management where recovery capabilities could be and what is actually limiting the organization from getting there. With less uninformed assumptions and finger pointing and more hard facts, management is better positioned to determine whether priorities need to change or funding needs to be increased. And all parties can walk away knowing the limitations they need to work within and why those limitations exist. We have two clients, both credit unions, but with entirely opposite relationships with their IT departments. One credit union is highly adversarial with their IT counterparts to the point of almost screaming matches in meetings, and the other is an incredibly close collaboration. The former has wanted improved recovery timelines for things like their phone system to support their call center for many years and have had absolutely no success in achieving it. The latter has made huge recovery time improvements in all aspects of their disaster recovery and business continuity plans, like we have never seen before in just 6 months. They have each other's backs. They present a united front to management and they are reaping the rewards of that approach. The next mistake we often see is making your plan too big and too complex. I have another true story to share that should demonstrate this one. We have a client whose initial plan we wrote a number of years ago, quite a few now. Shortly after, they hired someone to take their BC planning and its maintenance in house. So we simply performed annual tabletop exercises for them for a number of years and left the plan maintenance and updates to them. Once this individual left the organization, we were asked to take our larger role now in the maintenance of their plan. And wow, what a surprise! First, they had created two completely separate versions of their plan. One in the software that we had initially drafted and had been using as the point of reference for exercising their plan. The second, a massive Word document, hundreds of pages of content, much of it repeated in a number of different formats in the same document, leaving it largely unnavigable. Needless to say, there was much confusion on the part of recovery team members as to which plan they should even follow and what was most up to date. Apparently, under the pressure of a significant client, the company had hired a technical writer to modify their plan to replicate the format that this new client wanted to see, the format that the client's plan was in and that they were more familiar with. So, when the internal ownership for business continuity within this organization changed, no surprise, the new owners were appalled at the size and the complexity of the document and deemed it pretty much unusable. Now, there's much debate about the best format of a business continuity plan, and there's really no one right answer here. However, there are guidelines that can be followed. Business continuity plans are a wealth of resources to support decision making. These resources may include some technical documentation, such as how to access your email from home, but also a wealth of other reference documentation, contact information, policies, alternate procedures, etc. The document needs to be easy to navigate, and with that generally comes making it short and concise. This is where I like BCP software, and yes, I'm biased as we sell it, and that's what I use to write and maintain plans. But with the right tool, it's easy to create a really short bit of content for a team, the equivalent of 2, 3 pages max, with links to more details you might need depending on the scenario. With 2 pages, it's really easy to find what you need: the scope, the purpose, the objectives, and that trail of historical changes are not going to be the material that people need to access immediately. Your responders should be able to skip past these sections quickly and easily find the content they're looking for. So at this point, I want to talk about our first poll. So we're talking about the use of BCP software. So I'd be curious to find out from those participating in the call today, are you currently using BCP software to write and maintain your plan? So Skip, if you can pop that poll up, that would be great. And everyone on the call, just click a little yes or no there as to whether or not you're currently using BCP software to write and maintain your business continuity plan. We'll just give everyone a couple seconds to answer that poll. And when it looks like all the responses have come in, we'll get the summary from Skip.
Yeah, so far we've got about 50% of the call has responded, and that seems to have settled out at 50%. So of that, we have 63% of respondents have said no, they do not use BCP software, and 38% says that yes, they do use BCP software.
All right, great. Thanks everyone for participating in that. Regardless of whether BCP software is being used, plans can be written in many different formats, but we always want to do so with the end in mind. People are going to be a little stressed and are not going to have a lot of patience. They need to find the information they need, and they need to find it quickly. Everything a response team needs should be able to fit in the equivalent of a virtual pamphlet, that 2-pager, with potential links to other references such as supplier contacts, detailed procedures, etc. Think about how you want to use that space on that pamphlet, and then use it wisely when you're putting your plan together. Next mistake is not maintaining the plan. We saw the impact of this at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. A few clients that don't really spend much time keeping their plans up to date all of a sudden came scrambling, wondering what they should do to ensure they were ready. We pointed them to the growing list of largely unaddressed gaps and action items we had always been documenting in their plans to ensure they were prepared, and indicated it might be high time to start tackling those. For some, it may be the only time they've actually ever taken a look at them. The issue of plan maintenance actually leads quite nicely from the last mistake of having a plan that is too big and too complex to use. If I had to review and update a document that was hundreds of pages long, you better believe I would probably procrastinate that task as long as humanly possible and find every excuse in the book to just not get it done. Given that business continuity is almost always given a relatively low priority in most organizations, there will almost always be something of greater urgency than updating the business continuity plan. For this reason, we need to keep the plan lean and keep the update needs to a minimum. So the sheer size and complexity of your plan is one of the driving forces that lead to the issue of not maintaining your plan. Other factors, well, accountability is certainly one of them. Without there being clear lines of responsibility around who is supposed to be maintaining what, we end up with a whole lot of finger pointing and not a lot of action. Maintenance responsibilities need to be delineated from the start, and these responsibilities need to be specific. Who is to do the review? What exactly are they reviewing? How are they providing their feedback or making the necessary updates themselves? And at what frequency are these updates being completed? And what are the consequences of these if these updates don't happen in a timely manner? Additionally, I'll come back to software again. With the right tool, you can easily identify what is getting stale dated in your plan, what has been updated more recently, so that you can easily target your plan maintenance efforts. Rather than reviewing everything, you can simply focus on those sections that haven't been updated recently. Now, let's talk about the next issue of not socializing your plan and program. Sometimes a plan could be great, but nobody knows that it exists, or very few people. We have a client that is pretty diligent about updating their business continuity plan, all things considered. They do good things like very routine updates, they conduct annual tabletop exercises. And when we conduct those exercises as part of our service, we make any updates to their plan based on the learnings from the exercise and track any action items that need to be addressed. Once these updates have been completed, we ask the response teams to review the plan to ensure that the changes are accurate, will meet their needs in a business interruption, and that they are aware of where the various pieces of information they might need can be found in their plan. While we encourage every member of our response team to review the plan, what we find is that often only the team leader is asked to perform the review. They'll do great reviews and provide excellent feedback, but that's where the sharing ends. The rest of the members of their team are never even made aware that the plan was even updated. Now, fortunately, this client has not needed to activate their plan, but imagine year after year of plan updates being completed with no one but the team leader being familiar with them until the plan is exercised a year later. If the team leader isn't available when a business interruption occurs, their recovery could be on rocky ground. The second part of socializing your plan involves the people in your organization that may not be directly involved with the business continuity program or even have a specific role on a response team, but will certainly be looking for direction when things go sideways. The last thing a person with a key role in your response plan needs is a flurry of emails, phone calls, or texts from their direct reports wondering what to do next. As part of the planning within your organization, there should be a clear expectation among all employees as to what they should do when a business interruption occurs once health and safety concerns are addressed. After everyone has been evacuated, for example, and they're standing in the parking lot, everyone out there should know that they are to wait to receive direction and by what method, or who they are to reach out to in order to seek that direction. There should be no ambiguity in this regard. In fact, we've heard some auditors state that they should be able to walk up to any employee in an organization, ask them about the business continuity plan, and they should receive an answer that provides evidence that the employee is aware that the plan exists and what that employee's role is in that plan. Socializing is just as important if you're planning to use a notification or communication tool of some sort to reach your employees. I'm sure all of us can relate to the number of telemarketing texts and phone calls we receive nowadays. It seems like the number of actual phone calls and texts I receive are well outnumbered by the spam. As a result, there's lots of people that just don't respond to texts or phone calls from numbers they don't recognize. If you're planning to use a different method of communication with your employees during a business interruption, you need to be pretty confident that they'll respond to the number that's being used to reach them. All employees that may be reached using your communication tool should know what email, phone, or text number they'll be receiving those communications from, and they should have this contact information in the address book of their mobile phone so that these messages are not ignored as spam. Also, you may want to capture more than just their work phone numbers. We have a client who wasn't having any success in reaching their employees after hours using their communication tool, only to discover that a large number of the employees either left their work cell phones in their desk drawer or just turned them off as soon as they left the office. Next mistake is not exercising your plan. I always say we have two different types of clients that we work with. There are those that have a plan out of genuine concern for their ability to recover, so they actually experience a business interruption. And then there's those who tend to assign dedicated resources to writing their plan, but they're really just doing it to check the box to say that they have a plan, either because they heard somewhere that it's supposed to be a good idea or they need to check a box for some important customer. This latter group does not tend to assign dedicated resources for long. They may hire someone to write the plan, and then once completed, it actually just sits in a corner or on a server somewhere gathering physical or virtual dust. This is a scenario that is all too familiar to us. At best, they start out with all sorts of motivation and high hopes of developing and maintaining their plan, but conflicting priorities quickly get in the way, leaving them scrambling when they want to actually use their plan to help them respond to an interruption of some sort. At worst, they only devote enough resources to get their plan written, and after that, they feel their work is done, and this document they've produced is treated like the parachute they'll need if their business starts free falling after a disaster. Unfortunately, their parachute may have a big gaping hole in it. No one in the organization even knows how to use said parachute, and probably a large number don't even know where to find it. With the months of adjusting that we've experienced as a result of the pandemic coming up on a year now, we've noticed both increased and decreased emphasis on business continuity. Some businesses are realizing that they weren't as prepared as they would have liked to have been, and as a result, are coming looking for plan updates and tabletop exercising to ensure they're prepared next time. While others have felt the financial pinch that COVID has brought to bear on their industry and find themselves needing to cut back on investments in BCP. So we have another poll for you here because we've been hearing both of these stories quite frequently. Skip, if you want to pop up the next poll, we're curious to know, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, how has your organization changed its spending on business continuity? Are you finding there's more investment, maybe more allocation of personnel towards doing BCP, perhaps money to hire consulting or purchase software? Or is your organization maybe cutting back, laying people off, assigning more responsibilities that are not BCP related to their BCP person, those sorts of things? Or have you kind of maintained status quo with no change? So I'll let Skip let us know when it looks like that poll is nearing the end and give us the results of that.
Yeah, it looks like it's settled out right now, and we have 38% have more investment, 0% has less investment, and 63% has no change.
Oh, interesting. So mostly more investment going on. So good to know that people are working towards getting prepared for the next interruption that might be coming along. Now, when it comes specifically to exercising, we also have to be wary of what I call half-hearted exercising. There's a tendency for organizations to just go through the motions when running through a tabletop exercise. As realistic as we try to make the scenario, there's a reluctance in the room to actually do the work and execute on anything. For example, we might tell the management team that their building has been destroyed. They've activated their plan to bring in some temporary office trailers. So we ask, who's going to get the first trailer that arrives? If we're lucky, they'll identify a department. When pushed to ask who from that department, given the limited seats they will have when the first trailer arrives, 90% of the time the answer will be, well, we would figure that out at the time. They neglect to recognize that an exercise is that time to practice that figuring out. You won't know what roadblocks you run into during that figuring until you actually try to do it during a scenario exercise. You don't know what you don't know until you try. I always say a hurdler doesn't say they'll figure out how to jump over the hurdles when they come up to them on the next race. They practice it so that when the real thing happens, they know exactly what they're doing. The real value of a business continuity plan is not actually in the plan itself, but in the exercising that is done to practice executing on that plan. If a hurdler never puts their hurdling skills to test, they have no way of knowing if they'll ever finish the race, never mind win it. The same applies when you exercise your BCP. You need to actually execute. Otherwise, you don't know what you don't know until it's too late to figure it out. Next, let's go to not activating on your plan. So, speaking of executing during your exercises, maybe you haven't made any of the mistakes we've discussed so far. Your plan reflects your organization's true threats. It's short, simple, plainly written without too much jargon. You've really used the results of your business impact analysis to ensure your plan reflects your most critical functions. You're confident that the resources required will be available. IT's on board with their disaster recovery plan, and it dovetails nicely with your business continuity plan. Everyone in the organization is aware of the plan, and you have such a great approach to maintenance. The teams look forward to making their updates and participating in tabletop exercises. Well, what else can possibly go wrong? Well, we have a client that has a lot of the characteristics I just described. Their organization is really quite engaged in all aspects of business continuity. I won't say they love plan maintenance or exercising, but they're certainly engaged. So, when they experienced a firewall issue a couple of years ago that limited their access to the outside world for a few critical functions, one would expect that they might be ready for anything. But the recovery was still a little rough. Despite so much readiness, they came dangerously close to not meeting their recovery time objectives on a number of processes. So, how did such a well prepared organization have a near miss? Well, they had a workaround in place for the issue at a neighboring location. The critical application and associated hardware were duplicated at a terminal across the street. They just had to walk across the street to use it. Their plan required that those who had responsibilities with a recovery time of less than a day and needed this particular system were to leverage this alternate location across the street. So, what went wrong? Well, the issue happened in the morning, and this story may feel familiar to some of you. A communication was sent out to all staff that the problem was being worked on, and they expected a resolution within an hour or two. With lots of time to spare before critical deadlines later that day, everyone continued working on their tasks. The next update came out to say that it'll be a little longer, maybe an additional hour or two. And the next update, same thing, with each update indicating the solution was only an hour or two away. There was no urgency to activate alternate procedures. Everyone just remained in their seats, waiting for the promised resolution to come around. Problem was, it didn't come around. And with the end of day deadlines looming for a number of departments, it was finally recognized that there were a lot of people that were going to need that single terminal across the street, and they were quickly running out of time. Those that needed it were then lined up, sweating as the time was quickly ticking by. They made it, but just by the skin of their teeth. So, what happened here? Well, in a nutshell, no one thought to activate the darn plan they had in place. We see this happening particularly when situations evolve quite gradually and seem rather innocuous at the start. Even in the current pandemic situation we're in today, a number of companies found it very difficult to determine when exactly to pull the trigger and activate their plan. And many left it too late, struggling to get everyone home in a timely manner and to secure the necessary equipment required from working for their homes, especially with so many companies competing for those similar resources. Now, with some plans, there are activation fees. So it's understandable to not want to pull the trigger on an alternate work location, for example, that could cost you tens of thousands of dollars. But these big decisions are often the ones that get practiced during tabletop exercises so that management has some experience in knowing when it's time to pull that big trigger on the big issue. With these smaller situations, it's a little less cut and dry, but you still need to weigh the pros and cons every time there is an interruption, no matter how small. For our client, other than the inconvenience of walking across the street, there really wasn't any risk in activating the business continuity plan for those teams that needed to use this particular terminal. So don't be afraid to activate some of your teams, especially when there's a little downside to doing so. Better safe than sorry. The last mistake to discuss is just not learning from mistakes, yours or somebody else's. If nothing else, the one good thing that should come from this pandemic is an opportunity to learn from mistakes. There have been some great success stories. Take our health insurance client with a very strong work from the office policy. They successfully transitioned 95% of their workforce home while dealing with power outages and an office flood at the same time. We conducted a lessons learned with them in May, and they really didn't have a whole lot to add to their plan. The lessons they learned were really that working from home has been great for a lot of their employees, and that a more lenient work from home policy with some potential permanent work from home positions will likely be a big part of their new normal. Now, just because they didn't make too many mistakes during this pandemic doesn't mean they don't have gaps in their plan and won't make mistakes in the future. I can tell you right now that they are guilty of some of the mistakes we've already mentioned today. While those mistakes didn't catch up to them this time, that's not to say they won't get them next time. Everyone should always be evaluating how they're doing and what they can be doing better next time. It's a primary reason we tell companies to keep a log of events whenever there is a business interruption of any size, so that you have something to look back upon to reflect to see what worked and what didn't. You may find mistakes or gaps in your plan by using it, but also by exercising your plan and responding to small interruptions. You want to find these gaps, errors, mistakes, and a good tabletop exercise should always uncover something, even if you didn't uncover anything, you probably didn't make it hard enough. If you've had a relatively seamless operational transition through this pandemic, then consider yourself lucky. But that doesn't mean that this will always be the case. Watch the experiences of those around you. There's also more than just a pandemic to deal with these days. Companies are dealing with cyber attacks. There's always a natural disaster or two in the works. Watch what is happening in your sector to see what mistakes those who operate in a similar manner to you have made. Also, look at the experiences of those in similar geographic locations to you. They may have some lessons learned after dealing with the same physical threats that you're at risk of. Never waste a good disaster. There's always room for improvement. There's always an opportunity to learn, so don't waste it. So, in summary, here's a list of the 10 mistakes we reviewed today. Managing the wrong risks, using BCP jargon, not using business impact analysis results or establishing priorities, not partnering with IT, making your plan too big and too complex, not maintaining your plan, not socializing your plan, not exercising your plan, not activating your plan when you actually need it, and not learning from your mistakes. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic back over to Skip to see if any questions have trickled in throughout the webinar today.
Well, Tam, I think you've done an amazing job, and there were no questions from anybody. You must have
All
answered
right.
all of their questions perfectly.
Great. Well, for those of you who may have more complex questions, as Skip mentioned at the start, our email address is up on screen here, support@kingsbridgebcp.com. So do feel free to email us if you have any questions resulting from today's webinar, and we'd be happy to get back to you with answers to those.